The storm rolled in like an uninvited guest, its dark clouds swallowing the late afternoon sun. The wind howled through the trees, bending branches and scattering leaves across Rachel Carter's small cabin. She stood by the window, watching the chaos unfold outside with a mix of awe and unease. Her son, Liam, sat on the worn-out couch, coloring in a picture book that had seen better days. The faint scratching of his crayon against the paper was drowned out by the thunder rumbling overhead. Rachel sighed, pulling her sweater tighter around herself. Life hadn't been kind to her lately. A single mother at 32, she worked 2 jobs just to keep the electricity running and food on the table. The cabin they lived in wasn't much, just a wooden structure nestled deep in the woods, but it was home. And for now, that was enough. "Mommy, can we go outside?" Liam asked, his wide eyes full of curiosity as he looked up from his coloring. "No, sweetie," Rachel replied gently, kneeling beside him. "It's too dangerous with this storm. We'll stay inside where it's safe." Liam pouted, but didn't argue. He knew better than to push when his mom used that tone. Instead, he went back to his drawing, humming a tune under his breath. Rachel smiled softly before heading to the kitchen to check on dinner. The pot of soup simmering on the stove filled the air with a comforting aroma, though it did little to ease the tension knotting her shoulders. As the hours passed, the storm showed no signs of letting up. Lightning streaked across the sky, illuminating the forest surrounding their cabin in brief flashes. Rain hammered against the roof, creating a rhythmic patter that should have been soothing. But something about the night felt off. Rachel couldn't quite put her finger on it, but there was an underlying sense of unease that refused to leave her alone. It was close to midnight when she first heard it, a faint sound carried by the wind, barely audible over the storm. At first, she thought it was just another trick of the weather, branches creaking or animals scurrying for shelter. But then it came again, clearer this time. A voice, calling for help. Rachel froze, her heart pounding in her chest. She glanced toward Liam, who was fast asleep on the couch, curled up under a blanket. Should she ignore it? It could be nothing or worse, someone trying to lure her into danger. But what if it wasn't? What if someone really needed help? After a moment of hesitation, Rachel grabbed the flashlight from the counter and slipped on her raincoat. She hesitated at the door, glancing back at Liam one last time before stepping out into the storm. The cold rain hit her like needles, soaking through her coat almost instantly. The wind whipped at her hair, making it hard to see even with the flashlight's beam cutting through the darkness. "Hello?" she called out, her voice trembling. "Is anyone there?" For a few seconds, there was only silence, save for the relentless roar of the storm. Then, faintly, she heard it again. A weak cry for help, coming from somewhere deeper in the woods. Rachel took a deep breath and began walking, her boots sinking into the muddy ground with each step. The forest loomed around her, shadows dancing in the flickering light of her flashlight. Every crack of a branch or rustle of leaves made her jump, her imagination conjuring all sorts of horrors lurking just beyond the beam of light. She trudged onward, following the sound until she reached a clearing. There, partially hidden beneath a pile of dirt and leaves, was a man. His face was pale, his lips blue from the cold, and his body lay still except for the shallow rise and fall of his chest. Rachel's stomach churned as she realized he was buried alive, his arms pinned beneath the weight of the earth. "Oh my God," she whispered, rushing to his side. She dropped to her knees, digging frantically with her bare hands. The mud clung to her fingers, but she didn't stop. She couldn't, not when every second counted. "Hold on," she murmured, more to herself than to him. "Just hold on." Finally, after what felt like an eternity, she managed to free his upper body. The man groaned weakly, his eyelids fluttering open. His gaze met hers, glassy and unfocused, but filled with gratitude nonetheless. "Thank you," he rasped, his voice barely audible over the storm. "You saved me." Rachel helped him sit up, supporting his weight as he struggled to breathe. "What happened to you?" she asked, her voice shaking. "Who did this?" The man didn't answer immediately. Instead, he leaned heavily against her, his breathing ragged. When he finally spoke, his words sent a chill down her spine. "They think I'm dead," he whispered, his voice tinged with both fear and urgency. "But they don't know I'm still alive." Rachel stared at him, her mind racing. Who was this man, and who were they? Before she could ask anything else, his head lolled forward, unconsciousness claiming him once again. For a moment, she considered leaving him there, retreating back to the safety of her cabin. But something stopped her. Maybe it was the desperation in his voice, or maybe it was the fact that she couldn't abandon someone in such dire need. With great effort, Rachel hauled the man to his feet, draping one of his arms over her shoulders. Step by agonizing step, she dragged him back toward the cabin, the storm raging around them as if protesting her decision. By the time they reached the front door, she was drenched, exhausted, and questioning her sanity. But she had done it. She had saved him. Inside, she laid him down on the couch, covering him with blankets to ward off the chill. As she tended to his injuries, cleaning the cuts on his face and checking for broken bones, she studied him closely. He was older than her, probably in his 40s, with sharp features and salt and pepper hair. Despite his disheveled state, there was an air of authority about him, as if he was used to being in charge. Rachel's thoughts were interrupted when Liam stirred, waking up to find a strange man lying on their couch. "Who is that, Mommy?" he asked sleepily, rubbing his eyes. "It's okay, sweetheart," Rachel reassured him, smoothing his hair. "He's hurt, so we're helping him. Go back to sleep." Liam nodded, too tired to question further, and drifted off again. Rachel turned her attention back to the man, her brow furrowed in concern. Whoever he was, whatever trouble he was in, she knew one thing for certain. Bringing him here had changed everything. Whether for better or worse, she couldn't yet say. All she knew was that the storm outside wasn't the only danger lurking in the woods tonight. The storm outside eventually began to calm, though the tension inside Rachel's cabin only grew thicker. The man she had rescued, his name was Daniel Harper, as he later introduced himself, was slowly regaining consciousness. He lay on the couch, his eyes half open, staring at the ceiling as if trying to piece together how he had ended up there. Rachel sat nearby, watching him carefully while sipping a cup of tea to steady her nerves. Liam was still asleep in his room, blissfully unaware of the stranger who now shared their small space. "Thank you," Daniel said finally, breaking the silence. His voice was hoarse, but stronger than before. "I don't know what I would have done if you hadn't found me." Rachel nodded, setting her tea down. "You're welcome. But you need to tell me what happened. Who buried you out there?" Daniel hesitated, his gaze shifting away from hers. For a moment, it seemed like he might refuse to answer. Then, with a deep sigh, he began to speak. "I was hiking alone. It wasn't supposed to be anything dangerous, just a quiet walk through the woods. But then someone attacked me. They knocked me out and left me for dead." "Who?" Rachel pressed, leaning forward slightly. "Did you recognize them?" "No," Daniel admitted, shaking his head. "It all happened so fast. One moment I was walking, and the next, darkness. When I woke up, I was underground, buried alive." He shuddered at the memory, his hands clenching into fists. "They must have thought I wouldn't survive." Rachel frowned, her instincts telling her there was more to the story. "Why would anyone do that? You're not just some random hiker, are you?" Daniel met her gaze, his expression unreadable. Let's just say I've made some enemies over the years." That vague response did little to satisfy Rachel's curiosity, but she decided not to push further for now. Instead, she focused on practical matters. "Do you have family or friends you can call? Someone who can help you?" Again, Daniel hesitated. "Not right now. My phone is gone. They took it when they attacked me. And even if I could contact someone, I'm not sure who I can trust." Rachel crossed her arms, feeling a mix of frustration and unease. This man was clearly keeping secrets, yet she couldn't deny the desperation in his voice. Whatever trouble he was in, it was serious. Serious enough to make her question whether saving him had been a mistake. The next morning brought no answers, only more questions. Rachel woke early, tiptoeing past Daniel, who was still asleep on the couch, and checking on Liam. Her son was already up, playing quietly with his toys. She smiled faintly, grateful for the normalcy he brought to her chaotic life. After making breakfast, she stepped outside to assess the damage caused by the storm. The woods surrounding her cabin were a mess. Trees had fallen, branches littered the ground, and puddles of water glistened under the pale sunlight. As she surveyed the scene, something caught her eye, a set of footprints leading toward her property. They were fresh, the edges sharp despite the rain-soaked soil. Rachel's stomach twisted as she followed the trail, her heart pounding faster with each step. The footprints stopped abruptly near the edge of her yard, disappearing into the dense underbrush. Whoever had left them hadn't come close enough to see the cabin, but they had been close enough to scout it. Rachel hurried back inside, locking the door behind her. She debated telling Daniel about the discovery, but decided against it. If he truly was being hunted, bringing attention to herself and Liam could put them all in greater danger. Over the next few days, an uneasy routine settled into the cabin. Daniel recovered quickly, thanks to Rachel's care, though he remained distant and guarded. He spent most of his time sitting by the window, staring out at the woods with a haunted look in his eyes. Rachel tried to keep busy, cleaning, cooking, and spending time with Liam, but her thoughts kept drifting back to Daniel and the cryptic things he had said. One evening, after putting Liam to bed, Rachel joined Daniel by the window. "You seem worried," she ventured cautiously. "Is there something else you're not telling me?" Daniel glanced at her, his jaw tightening. "I told you everything I could." "But you didn't," Rachel countered, her voice firm. "You're hiding something, and I deserve to know what it is, especially since my son and I are involved now." For a long moment, Daniel said nothing. Then, with a resigned sigh, he spoke. "You're right. I am hiding something. But it's not because I don't trust you. It's because I don't want to drag you deeper into this mess." "That ship has already sailed," Rachel shot back, her frustration bubbling over. "Whatever trouble you're in, it's here, in my home, so stop treating me like I'm just some bystander." Daniel studied her, his expression softening. "Fair enough," he said quietly, "but what I'm about to tell you, it changes everything." He paused, as if gathering his thoughts. "I'm not just a businessman, Rachel. I work or used to work for a company that develops advanced technology, things most people can't even imagine. But lately, I started having doubts. The projects we were working on, they weren't ethical. And when I tried to leave, well," he gestured to himself, his injuries speaking volumes. Rachel listened intently, her mind racing. "So whoever attacked you, they work for this company?" "Yes," Daniel confirmed grimly. "And they won't stop until they find me, or until they're sure I can't expose them." The weight of his words hung heavy in the air. Rachel felt a chill run down her spine. "What happens?" "If they find us, they'll kill me," Daniel said bluntly. "And they'll make sure you and your son never talk about it." His honesty was brutal, but Rachel appreciated it. At least he wasn't sugarcoating the truth. Still, the realization that her life and Liam's was now in danger terrified her. She clenched her fists, forcing herself to stay calm. Then, we need to figure out a plan. Staying here isn't safe. I agree, Daniel said. But running isn't a solution either. They'll track us wherever we go. And what do we do? Rachel demanded, her voice rising. Just sit here and wait for them to show up? No, Daniel replied firmly. We fight back. The idea of fighting back sounded noble, but Rachel knew it wouldn't be easy. Over the following days, Daniel began teaching her basic self-defense techniques, showing her how to disable an attacker without using weapons. He also helped her fortify the cabin, boarding up windows and clearing away debris it could provide cover for intruders. Despite their efforts, the sense of impending doom lingered, casting a shadow over everything they did. Meanwhile, strange occurrences continued to plague them. Rachel noticed unfamiliar cars driving slowly past her property, their occupants scanning the area with binoculars. Her phone reception became spotty, cutting out entirely at times. Even the wildlife seemed quieter than usual, as if the forest itself was holding its breath. One night, as Rachel lay awake listening to the wind rustle through the trees, she heard a noise coming from downstairs. Her pulse quickened as she slipped out of bed, grabbing a baseball bat she had stashed under her mattress. Creeping silently to the top of the stairs, she peered down into the living room. Daniel was standing by the window, his silhouette illuminated by the moonlight. In his hand, he held a small device that looked like a cell phone. His lips moved silently, as if he were talking to someone. Rachel's grip tightened on the bat. Was he communicating with the people chasing him? Had she misjudged him completely? Before she could confront him, Daniel turned off the device and slipped it into his pocket. He stood there for a moment longer, staring out into the darkness, before returning to the couch. Rachel retreated to her room, her mind racing. She wanted to believe Daniel was on their side, but the doubt gnawed at her relentlessly. By the end of the week, Rachel's patience was wearing thin. Every creak of the floorboards, every rustle of leaves outside, sent her nerves spiraling. She tried to hide her anxiety from Liam, putting on a brave face whenever he was around, but it was becoming harder to keep up the act. Daniel, too, seemed increasingly restless, pacing the cabin like a caged animal. One afternoon, while Rachel was hanging laundry on the line outside, Daniel approached her. "We can't stay here much longer," he said, his tone urgent. "They're closing in." "How do you know?" Rachel asked sharply, narrowing her eyes. "I just do," Daniel replied, avoiding her gaze. "Trust me, Rachel. We need to leave." Tonight, Rachel hesitated, torn between fear and instinct. Something about his insistence made her uneasy. Yet, deep down, she knew he was right. Staying put wasn't an option anymore. With a reluctant nod, she agreed. "Fine, but we stick together. No secrets." Daniel gave her a solemn look. "I promise." As they prepared to leave, Rachel couldn't shake the feeling that they were walking straight into a trap. But with no other options left, she pushed the thought aside and focused on keeping Liam safe. Whatever came next, they would face it together or not at all. The night was cold and moonless, the kind of darkness that seemed to swallow everything whole. Rachel packed quickly, her hands trembling as she stuffed clothes, food, and a few essentials into a backpack. Liam sat on his bed, clutching his favorite, stuffed bear, his wide eyes reflecting both confusion and fear. "Mommy, where are we going?" he asked softly, his voice barely audible over the sound of rustling fabric. "We're just going on a little trip, sweetheart," Rachel replied, forcing a smile she didn't feel. "It'll be an adventure." Liam nodded, though his expression suggested he wasn't entirely convinced. Rachel zipped up the bag and turned to him, kneeling down to meet his gaze. "Listen to me, okay? No matter what happens, you stay close. To me or Daniel. Understand?" He nodded again, gripping his bear tighter. Rachel hugged him briefly before standing up and taking a deep breath. She glanced at the clock midnight. It was time. Downstairs, Daniel was already waiting by the door, wearing a dark jacket and carrying a duffel bag slung over his shoulder. His face was pale but determined, his eyes scanning the room as if expecting danger to burst through the walls at any moment. When Rachel entered, he gave her a curt nod. "Ready?" he asked, his voice low. "As ready as I'll ever be," Rachel muttered, adjusting the strap of her backpack. She glanced at Liam, who clung to her hand, and then back at Daniel. "What's a plan?" "We head north," Daniel said, pointing toward the woods behind the cabin. "There's an old ranger station about 10 miles from here. If we can make it there, we might have a chance to regroup." Rachel frowned. 10 miles through dense forest in the middle of the night sounded like a nightmare, especially with Liam in tow. But she didn't argue. They had no other choice. Journey began quietly enough. The three of them moved cautiously, sticking to the shadows and avoiding open spaces. Rachel carried Liam when he grew too tired to walk, her muscles burning with every step. Daniel led the way, his flashlight casting a narrow beam of light onto the muddy path ahead. The forest was eerily silent, save for the occasional snap of a twig or rustle of leaves caused by their movements. For the first hour, they encountered no problems. But as they ventured deeper into the woods, Rachel noticed subtle signs that something or someone was following them. Footprints in the mud that weren't theirs. Broken branches marking their trail. A distant flicker of light that vanished whenever they tried to investigate. "Do you see that?" Rachel whispered to Daniel, her voice tight with anxiety. "I see it," Daniel replied grimly, his hand tightening around the flashlight. "Keep moving. Don't look back." Rachel obeyed, though her heart raced faster with each passing minute. She could feel eyes watching them from the darkness, unseen, but undeniable. Every instinct screamed at her to run, but running would only tire them out and leave Liam vulnerable. After what felt like hours, they reached a narrow stream cutting through the forest. Daniel knelt beside it, examining the water. "We'll follow this upstream," he said. "It'll mask our tracks." Rachel nodded, grateful for his knowledge of survival tactics. She splashed water on her face, trying to calm her nerves, while Liam crouched beside her, dipping his fingers into the icy current. For a brief moment, the tension eased, but it didn't last long. A sudden noise, a sharp crack, like a branch, snapping underfoot made them freeze. Rachel spun around, her heart pounding as she scanned the trees. At first, she saw nothing, then movement. A figure stepped into the edge of their flashlight's beam, tall and shadowy. Behind it, another. Peered, and another. "Who's there?" Daniel called out, his voice steady despite the warning note beneath it. No one answered. Instead, the figures moved closer, spreading out in a loose semicircle. Rachel tightened her grip on Liam's hand, pulling him behind her. Her mind raced, searching for options, but there were none. They were surrounded. One of the figures stepped forward, revealing himself in the dim light. He was a man in his 30s, with a rugged face and cold, calculating eyes. In his hand, he held a gun. "Daniel Harper," the man said, his tone mocking. "You've been hard to find. What do you want?" Daniel demanded, stepping in front of Rachel and Liam protectively. "You know what we want." The man replied, his lips curling into a smirk. "Hand over the drive, and maybe we'll let your friends live." Rachel's stomach churned. Drive? What drive? She glanced at Daniel, whose jaw was clenched so tightly it looked like it might shatter. Whatever this drive was, It clearly meant something important and dangerous. There is no drive. Daniel lied, his voice firm. You're wasting your time. The man chuckled, shaking his head. Don't insult my intelligence. Daniel, we know you took it. Now, give it to us, or things will get messy. Rachel's mind raced. She had no idea what they were talking about, but she knew one thing for certain. These men weren't bluffing. If Daniel didn't comply, they would hurt them or worse. Before anyone could say anything else, Liam whimpered softly behind Rachel. The sound seemed to echo unnaturally in the tense silence. The man's gaze shifted to the boy, and a cruel smile spread across his face. "Ah, I see you brought company," he said, raising his gun slightly. "How sweet. Maybe we should start with the kid." That was all it took. Without thinking, Rachel lunged forward, shoving Daniel aside and positioning herself directly between the man and Liam. "Leave him alone," she shouted, her voice cracking. With desperation, "Take whatever you want, but don't touch my son." The man raised an eyebrow, clearly amused by her bravery or recklessness. "Feisty," he remarked. "I like that. But it won't save you." Rachel's breath came in shallow gasps as she braced herself for what might come next. Just when she thought it was over, Daniel stepped forward, his hands raised in surrender. "Wait," he said, his voice calm but urgent. "I'll give you what you want. Just let them go." The man tilted his head, studying Daniel carefully. "And why should I believe you?" "Because if you don't, you'll never get it," Daniel replied evenly. "I'm the only one who knows where it is. Kill me, and you lose everything." For a moment, no one spoke. The forest itself seemed to hold its breath, waiting for the man's decision. Finally, he lowered his gun slightly and gestured to his companions. "Fine, but if you try anything funny, I'll put a bullet in all three of you." Daniel nodded, his expression unreadable. He turned to Rachel, his eyes filled with a mixture of guilt and resolve. "Trust me," he mouthed silently. Rachel stared at him, her chest tight with uncertainty. Did she trust him? Could she afford not to? With Liam clinging to her leg and armed men surrounding them, she realized she had no choice. The group began, moving again, this time under the watchful eyes of their captors. Daniel led the way, occasionally glancing back at Rachel and Liam. His body language betrayed his agitation, his shoulders tense and his steps deliberate. Rachel followed closely, her mind racing as she tried to piece together what was happening. Eventually, they arrived at a small clearing where a black van was parked. 2 more men stood guard beside it, their faces obscured by hoods. As they approached, one of the guards opened the van's side door, revealing a cramped interior lined with equipment. Rachel's stomach sank as she realized this wasn't just some random group of thugs. It was an organized operation. "Get in," the leader ordered, gesturing toward the van. Rachel hesitated, her instincts screaming at her to resist. But before she could act, Daniel spoke up. "Let them wait here. I'll go with you." The leader laughed, a harsh, humorless sound. "Nice try, Harper. You really think I'm that stupid?" "It's not a trick," Daniel insisted, his voice firm. "I'll cooperate fully. Just keep them out of this." The leader studied him for a long moment, his expression unreadable. Finally, he shrugged. "Fine, but if you screw us over, they die." With that, he shoved Daniel toward the van and turned his attention back to Rachel and Liam. "Sit down and shut up," he snapped, waving his gun threateningly. "If either of you makes a sound, you're dead." Rachel swallowed hard, her throat dry with fear. She sat down on the damp ground, pulling Liam close and wrapping her arms around him. Her mind raced, searching for a way out, but she knew they were outnumbered and outgunned. All they could do was wait and hope Daniel had a planned dot as the van roared to life and disappeared into the night Rachel felt a wave of helplessness wash over her. Whatever happened next, one thing was clear. Their lives depended entirely on Daniel and the mysterious drive everyone seemed so desperate to get their hands on. The van disappeared into the darkness, its taillights fading like embers swallowed by the night. Rachel sat on the cold, wet ground, her arms wrapped tightly around Liam as he trembled against her. The men who had stayed behind didn't bother tying them up or even keeping a close watch. They knew Rachel and Liam were no threat. Still, their presence loomed heavily, the weight of their guns and menacing stares enough to keep the pair rooted in place. Rachel's mind raced, trying to make sense of everything that had happened. What was this drive everyone kept talking about? Why was it so important? And why did Daniel seem willing to sacrifice himself for it? She glanced at Liam, his face pale and streaked with dirt, and felt a surge of guilt. This was all her fault. If she hadn't saved Daniel from the woods, none of this would have happened. But deep down, she knew she couldn't have left him there. Not when he was buried alive. Not when he begged for help. Saving someone wasn't supposed to lead to this kind of nightmare. As the minutes dragged on, the forest grew quieter, the only sounds coming from the occasional rustle of leaves and the distant hoot of an owl. Rachel tried to focus on those. Small noises, anything to distract herself from the fear gnawing at her insides. Her eyes darted between the two guards standing nearby, their silhouettes barely visible in the dim light. One leaned casually against a tree, while the other paced slowly, his gun slung over his shoulder. Neither seemed particularly concerned about their captives. "Mommy," Liam whispered, his voice trembling. "Are we going to be okay?" Rachel forced a smile, though her lips felt stiff and unnatural. "Of course, sweetheart. We just need to stay calm and wait." But inside, she wasn't so sure. What if Daniel failed? What if they decided Rachel and Liam were more trouble than they were worth? The thought made her stomach churn. She tightened her grip on her son, pulling him closer as if her embrace alone could shield him from harm. Hours passed, or maybe it was only minutes. Time felt distorted in the oppressive silence of the forest. Just when Rachel thought she might scream from the tension, headlights pierced through the trees. A second van pulled into the clearing, its engine growling softly as it came to a stop. The doors opened, and several figures stepped out, including the leader who had taken Daniel away earlier. Rachel's heart sank as she watched them approach. Their expressions gave nothing away, but the way they moved confident, almost smug, told her everything she needed to know. Whatever Daniel had promised them, he must have delivered. That realization filled her with dread. What had he given? Up? And what would happen to them now? The leader stopped a few feet away, crossing his arms as he studied Rachel and Liam. "Looks like your friend held up his end of the bargain," he said, his tone casual but laced with menace. "Too bad. For you, it doesn't change yours." Rachel's breath hitched. "What do you mean?" "Your loose ends," the man replied bluntly. "And loose ends have a way of unraveling plans." Before Rachel could respond, one of the guards raised his gun, aiming it directly at her. Panic surged through her veins, and she instinctively shielded Liam with her body. "No!" she shouted, her voice cracking. "Please, he gave you what you wanted." The leader smirked, clearly enjoying her desperation. "True, but people talk, kids especially." His gaze flicked to Liam, who whimpered softly. "Can't take chances." Rachel's mind screamed at her to act, to fight back, but her body refused to obey. She was frozen, paralyzed by fear and helplessness. Tears blurred her vision as she clutched Liam tighter, bracing for the worst. Then, without warning, chaos erupted. A loud crack split the air, followed by the sharp bark of gunfire. One of the guards stumbled backward, clutching his leg as blood seeped through his fingers. Another shouted in confusion, spinning around to locate the source of the attack. From the shadows emerged a group of armed figures, their faces obscured by masks. They moved quickly, taking down the remaining guards with precision and efficiency. Rachel ducked low, shielding Liam as bullets whizzed past overhead. Her ears rang from the noise, and her chest heaved with each panicked breath. When the shooting finally stopped, she risked a glance upward. Squinting through the haze of smoke and dust, one of the masked figures knelt beside her, lowering their weapon. "Are you hurt?" A woman's voice asked urgently. Rachel shook her head, too stunned to speak. The woman reached out, helping her to her feet. "Come on, we need to move. Who are you?" Rachel managed to stammer, clutching Liam's hand tightly. "No time to explain," the woman replied, glancing over her shoulder. "We're getting you out of here." Still dazed, Rachel allowed herself to be led toward a waiting vehicle, parked at the edge of the clearing. As they climbed inside, she caught sight of Daniel sitting in the back seat, his face pale and drawn. Relief flooded through her, but it was short-lived. Whatever had just happened, it wasn't over. Once they were safely away from the scene, the woman introduced herself as Grace Miller. She explained that she worked for a private security firm, hired by Daniel's company to protect sensitive projects and people. According to Grace, Daniel had been targeted because of a prototype data drive containing groundbreaking technology capable of altering human consciousness. The implications were staggering, and the wrong hands could use it for unimaginable harm. "We intercepted their communications," Grace continued, her tone grim. "They planned to eliminate anyone connected to the project, including you and your son." Rachel stared at her, struggling to process the information. "Why didn't Daniel tell me any of this sooner?" "He was trying to protect you," Grace replied simply. "Sometimes secrets are safer than truths." Rachel turned to Daniel, anger bubbling beneath the surface. "You put us in danger," she accused, her voice shaking. "You should have told me the truth." Daniel met her gaze, guilt etched into every line of his face. "I know," he admitted quietly, "and I'm sorry. I never meant for this to happen. But if I'd involved you, they would have come after you sooner." His words did little to ease Rachel's frustration, but she bit back her retort. Now wasn't the time for arguments. They were safe for the moment, but that didn't mean the danger had passed. The group drove for hours, eventually reaching an abandoned ranger station nestled deep in the woods. It was a modest structure, weathered by time and neglect, but it offered shelter and relative safety. Inside, Grace set up a makeshift command center using portable equipment brought along in the van. Maps, laptops, and encrypted communication devices cluttered the table, creating an atmosphere of controlled urgency. While Grace coordinated with her team, Rachel tended to Liam, making sure he was warm and fed. Despite the adrenaline still coursing through her system, exhaustion began to creep in. Her eyelids drooped, and her muscles ached from the stress of the night's events. But sleep was impossible. Every creak of the floorboards, every rustle outside, sent her nerves spiraling. Eventually, Daniel approached her, his expression apologetic. "I owe you an explanation," he said softly, sitting across from her. "About everything." Rachel crossed her arms, her defenses still high. "Go ahead." Daniel took a deep breath, choosing his words carefully. This project, it started as something incredible. A way to revolutionize medicine, education, even mental health treatment. But somewhere along the way, things went wrong. The tech was too powerful, too easy to misuse. When I realized what they intended to do with it, I tried to leave. That's when they came after me. "And the drive?" Rachel prompted, her tone flat. "It contains the blueprint for the entire system," Daniel explained. "If it falls into the wrong hands, it could be catastrophic." That's why I hid it, and why they'll stop at nothing to find it. Rachel frowned, piecing together the fragments of his story. So where is it now? Daniel hesitated, his gaze dropping to the floor. I destroyed it before they captured me. For a moment, Rachel didn't respond. Then, slowly, she nodded. Good. Maybe now they'll leave us alone. I wish it were that simple, Daniel murmured, his voice heavy with regret. Even without the drive, the knowledge exists. And as long as I'm alive, they'll always see me as a threat. The implication hung in the air, unspoken but undeniable. Rachel felt a chill run down her spine. What happens next? Grace interrupted before Daniel could answer, stepping into the room with a grim expression. We've got incoming, she announced. They tracked us somehow. We need to move. Now, Rachel's heart sank. Just when she thought they might catch a break, the nightmare began anew. As she gathered Liam and prepared to leave once again, she couldn't shake the feeling that they were running out of places to hide and time to survive. The ranger station was no longer safe. Grace moved quickly, barking orders as she packed up the equipment and prepared for their escape. Rachel grabbed Liam's hand, her heart pounding as she followed Daniel and the others out into the cold. Night. The air was thick with tension, and every sound, the rustling of leaves, the distant hoot of an owl, felt like a warning. They were being hunted again. Grace led them deeper into the woods, taking winding paths that seemed to twist endlessly. Her knowledge of the terrain was impressive, but even she couldn't shake the feeling that they were running out of options. They're closing in, she muttered under her breath, glancing over her shoulder. We need a better plan. Rachel felt the weight of those words settle heavily on her shoulders. A better plan? What could possibly be better than running for their lives through the dark forest? She glanced at Liam, who clung to her side, his small face pale and drawn. He hadn't said much since the attack earlier, but his wide eyes spoke volumes. Fear radiated off him in waves, and Rachel hated herself for dragging him into this mess. Where are we going? She asked Grace, her voice trembling despite her best efforts to stay calm. There's an old cabin a few miles from here, Grace replied, her tone clipped. It's remote, off the grid. If we can make it there, we might have a chance to regroup. And if we don't? Rachel pressed, though she wasn't sure she wanted to hear the answer. Grace didn't respond immediately. Instead, she adjusted the strap of her backpack and scanned the trees around them. Then we fight. The journey to the cabin was grueling. The forest floor was uneven, littered with roots and rocks that made every step precarious. Liam stumbled, often his little legs struggling to keep up, and Rachel had to carry him more than once. Each time she set him down, she checked his feet for cuts or blisters, her hands shaking as she worked. Despite her exhaustion, she refused to let herself slow down. Slowing down meant falling behind, and falling behind meant getting caught. Daniel walked beside her, his face etched with guilt and determination. Every so often, he would glance at Rachel, opening his mouth as if to say something, only to close it again. Finally, after nearly an hour of silence, he spoke. I'm sorry, he said softly, his voice barely audible over the crunch of leaves beneath their boots. For everything. Rachel stopped walking, turning to face him. Her anger flared, hot and sharp, but she forced herself to take a deep breath before responding. Sorry doesn't fix this, Daniel. You brought this into our lives. Into my son's life. I know, Daniel admitted, his shoulders slumping. And I'll never forgive myself for that. But I swear to you, I'm doing everything I can to protect you both now. Rachel stared at him, searching his face for any sign of deceit. All she saw was sincerity and fear. Whether it was enough remained to be seen. By the time they reached the cabin, dawn was breaking, painting the sky in hues of orange and pink. The structure was small and dilapidated, its wooden walls warped with age and neglect. Still, it offered shelter, and for now, that was all that mattered. Grace ushered everyone inside, setting up a perimeter with motion sensors and tripwires while Rachel tended to Liam. Once Liam was settled in a corner of the single-room cabin, wrapped in blankets and sipping water from a bottle, Rachel joined Daniel near the window. He was watching the forest intently, his posture rigid with anticipation. "Do you think they'll find us?" she asked quietly. "They always do," Daniel replied, his voice heavy with resignation. "But we've got a head start. That gives us time to figure out our next move." Rachel frowned, her frustration bubbling to the surface. "What exactly is the next move?" "We can't keep running forever." "You're right," Daniel admitted. "Which is why I need to contact someone who can help us end this." He pulled out the burner phone he had used earlier and dialed a number from memory. After a few rings, someone answered on the other end. "It's me," Daniel said, keeping his voice low. "I need your help." There was a pause, followed by a muffled response Rachel couldn't make out. Daniel nodded, even though the person on the other end couldn't see him. "I know it's risky, but we don't have a choice. Can you meet us at the coordinates?" "I sent you?" Another pause, then Daniel exhaled sharply. "Thank you, and hurry." He hung up and turned to Rachel, his expression grim. That was Grace's contact, an ally within the company. If anyone can shut this down, it's them. Rachel crossed her arms, skepticism written all over her face. "And what if they're just another trap?" "They're not," Daniel insisted. "This person has been working against the project from the inside. They've risked everything to stop it." Rachel wanted to believe him, but trust was a luxury she couldn't afford anymore. "Let's hope you're right," she muttered, turning away. Hours passed, each one stretching longer than the last. Grace kept watch outside, her weapon ready, while Rachel stayed with Liam inside. Daniel paced nervously, occasionally glancing at his phone as if willing it to ring. The tension in the cabin was suffocating, broken only by the occasional creak of the floorboards or the soft hum of insects outside. Finally, just as the sun began to dip below the horizon, a car approached the cabin. Its headlights cut through the growing darkness, illuminating the trees and casting long shadows across the ground. Grace stepped out to intercept it, her gun raised cautiously. When the driver emerged, Grace lowered her weapon and gestured for them to come inside. The newcomer was a woman in her late 30s, with sharp features and piercing green eyes. She introduced herself as Elena Torres, a former colleague of Daniel's. "I came as soon as I got your message," she said, her tone brisk but tinged with concern. "What's the situation?" Daniel filled her in quickly, explaining the prototype drive, the attacks, and their current predicament. Elena listened intently, nodding occasionally. When he finished, she sighed deeply, rubbing her temples. "This is worse than I thought." "What do you mean?" Rachel asked, stepping forward hesitantly. Elena turned to her, her gaze steady. "The people chasing you, they're not just rogue operatives. They're backed by higher-ups in the company. People who won't stop until they get what they want. So what do we do?" Grace interjected, her voice sharp with urgency. "Destroy the tech completely," Elena replied firmly. "Not just the data, but the entire framework. Without it, they'll have nothing to work with." Daniel shook his head, his expression conflicted. "If we do that, years of research will be lost. Research that could save lives. And how many lives will be destroyed if it falls into the wrong hands?" Elena countered, her tone leaving. No room for argument. "You know I'm right, Daniel." For a long moment, no one spoke. The weight of the decision hung heavy in the air, pressing down on all of them. Finally, Daniel nodded reluctantly. "Okay, but we'll need access to They're servers to pull it off. I can get us in, Elena said, pulling a flash drive from her pocket. This contains a virus designed to wipe everything clean. Once it's uploaded, there's no going back. Rachel listened silently, her mind racing. Destroying the technology sounded like the safest option, but the implications were enormous. Lives could be saved or ruined depending on their choice. As much as she wanted to distance herself from the situation, she knew she couldn't. Her life and Liam's were already tied to it. Then let's do it, Daniel said finally, his voice firm despite the turmoil in his eyes. But we'll need to act fast. They're coming. As if on cue, the sound of approaching vehicles echoed through the forest. Headlights swept through the trees, drawing closer with each passing second. Grace moved to the window, peering out cautiously. There. Here. Panic surged through Rachel, but she forced herself to focus. There was no time for hesitation now. Whatever happened next, they would face it together, or not at all. Elena handed the flash drive to Daniel, her expression grim. Make sure this gets uploaded, no matter what. Daniel nodded, slipping the drive into his pocket. Then, without another word, he turned to Rachel. Stay here. Protect Liam. Before she could protest, he followed Grace outside, leaving Rachel alone with Elena and Liam. The boy looked up at her, his eyes wide with fear. Mommy, are they going to hurt us? Rachel knelt beside him, brushing a strand of hair from his forehead. No, sweetheart, I won't let them. But as the sounds of gunfire erupted in the distance, she couldn't shake the feeling that promises were the only thing she had left to give, and even those might not be enough. The sounds of gunfire echoed through the forest, each shot sending a fresh wave of terror coursing through Rachel's veins. She clutched Liam tightly, her body shielding his as they crouched in the corner of the cabin. Elena stood by the door, her weapon drawn and her eyes fixed on the darkness outside. The flickering light from a single lantern cast long shadows across the room, making every movement seem exaggerated and menacing. They're outnumbered, Elena muttered under her breath, glancing toward the window. We need to be ready. Ready? For what? Rachel asked, her voice trembling. What happens if they get inside? Elena didn't answer immediately. Instead, she adjusted her grip on her gun, her expression grim. If it comes to that, you stay behind me. Don't let go of your son. Rachel nodded, though the gesture felt hollow. How could she protect Liam when she could barely protect herself? Her mind raced with worst-case scenarios, but she pushed them aside. Panic wouldn't help anyone. All she could do was focus on surviving moment by moment. Outside, the battle raged on. The sharp crack of bullets was punctuated by shouts and the occasional thud of bodies hitting the ground. Rachel closed her eyes, trying to block out the noise, but it seeped into her consciousness anyway, relentless and suffocating. She whispered soft reassurances to Liam, her voice barely audible over the chaos dot after what felt like an eternity. The gunfire began to subside. The silence that followed was almost worse, heavy with uncertainty and dread. Rachel held her breath, straining to hear any sign of movement outside. Then, footsteps approached the cabin, slow and deliberate. Elena raised her weapon, aiming it at the door. Rachel tightened her grip on Liam, her heart pounding so loudly she was sure everyone could hear it. The door creaked open, and Daniel stepped inside, his face pale and streaked with dirt. Blood trickled from a cut on his forehead. But he was alive. It's done, he said hoarsely, leaning against the doorframe for support. The virus is uploaded. Their systems are wiped. Grace appeared behind him, her expression grim but relieved. We took care of most of them, but reinforcements are coming. We need to move now. Rachel exhaled sharply, a mix of relief and fear washing over her. They had succeeded, but their victory was fleeting. The people chasing them wouldn't give up easily, not after losing something so valuable. "Where do we go?" she asked, her voice shaking. "There's a safe house a few miles east," Grace replied, already moving toward the exit. "It's hidden, off the grid. If we can make it there, we'll be safe, at least for a little while." Daniel nodded. Turning to Rachel, "Can you keep going?" She hesitated, glancing at Liam. He was exhausted, his small frame trembling with fatigue. But despite everything, he hadn't complained once. Rachel swallowed hard, forcing herself to nod. "We'll manage." The journey to the safe house was even more harrowing than the previous ones. The forest seemed darker, the air heavier, as if nature itself was mourning the violence that had unfolded. Grace led the way, her movements cautious but purposeful. Daniel stayed close to Rachel and Liam, his presence both comforting and unsettling. Despite destroying the prototype drive, the weight of his guilt lingered, casting a shadow over everything. As they walked, Rachel found herself replaying the events of the past few days in her mind. Saving Daniel from the woods had seemed like a simple act of kindness, but it had spiraled into something far beyond her control. Lives had been lost, secrets revealed, and choices made that would haunt them all forever. And yet, amidst the chaos, one thing remained clear. She had done everything she could to protect Liam. When they finally reached the safe house, a small, unassuming cabin tucked away in a remote clearing, Rachel felt a flicker of hope. It wasn't much, but it offered shelter and a chance to catch their breath. Grace secured the perimeter while Elena tended to Daniel's injuries, cleaning the cut on his forehead and bandaging it carefully. "You did good," Elena said softly, her tone softer than before. "Not just with the upload, but with everything. You kept them alive." Daniel shook his head, his gaze distant. "At what cost?" "People died because of me." "And more would have died if you hadn't acted," Elena countered firmly. "You made the right choice, Daniel. Don't forget that." Rachel overheard the exchange, her chest tightening with conflicting emotions. Part of her wanted to hate Daniel for dragging them into this nightmare, but another part couldn't deny the sacrifices he had made and continued to make to protect them. Still, forgiveness wasn't something she could offer lightly. Inside the safe house, the group settled in for the night. Grace took the first watch, standing guard outside while the others rested. Rachel curled up on a makeshift bed with Liam, holding him close as he drifted off to sleep. For the first time in days, his breathing was steady, his face peaceful. She stroked his hair gently, tears welling in her eyes. No child should have to endure what he had been through, and yet, here they were. Daniel sat nearby, staring at the floor with a haunted expression. Rachel watched him for a moment before speaking. "Why did you come back for us?" she asked quietly, her voice breaking the silence. He looked up, startled by the question. "What? In the woods?" Rachel clarified, her tone soft but firm. "You could have left us behind. Why didn't you?" Daniel hesitated, his gaze dropping to his hands. "Because I owed you," he admitted finally. "You saved my life not just physically, but emotionally. You reminded me what it means to care about someone else. I couldn't walk away from that." Rachel studied him, searching for any hint of dishonesty. All she saw was sincerity and pain. Slowly, she nodded. "Just don't put us in danger again." "I won't," Daniel promised, his voice thick with emotion. "I swear it." The next morning brought a sense of cautious optimism. Grace reported no signs of pursuit, and Elena confirmed that the virus had successfully wiped the company's servers clean. The immediate threat was gone for now, but none of them believed the danger was truly over. Before leaving, Elena pulled Rachel aside. "Listen," she said, her tone serious. "This isn't the end. There will be others who want to recreate the tech. If anyone ever approaches you claiming to know Daniel, or asking about the project. Don't trust them. Run. Rachel nodded, her stomach churning at the thought of more trouble ahead. What about Daniel? Will he be safe? Elena hesitated, her expression troubled. That depends on him. He's made enemies, powerful ones. His best chance is disappearing, completely and staying gone. Rachel glanced at Daniel, who was helping Grace pack up the last of their supplies. Whatever happened next, she knew their paths would likely diverge. She wasn't sure how she felt about that dot as they prepared. To leave the safe house, Daniel approached Rachel one final time. Thank you, he said, his voice filled with gratitude and regret. For everything. Rachel met his gaze, her emotions swirling like storm clouds. Take care of yourself, Daniel. And remember, you owe us your life. He nodded solemnly, then turned and walked away, disappearing into the trees without looking back. Rachel watched him go, her heart heavy with unresolved feelings. She didn't know if she would ever see him again, or if she even wanted to. With Liam by her side, Rachel headed in the opposite direction, toward home. The road ahead would be difficult, but they had survived the unimaginable. And as long as they had each other, that was enough.